And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, March 23rd. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, with travel season ramping up, the CDC just hit a record number of volunteers to help monitor any viruses that might be on the move. Plus, a strategic alliance between the Federal Laboratories Consortium and FedTech is looking to speed up how federally funded research becomes real-world technology. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. President Trump's new choice to lead the Department of Homeland Security is advancing towards Senate confirmation. Markwayne Mullin had his nomination hearing before the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee last week. In some cases, he tried to present a sharp contrast to outgoing Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now for more details. Justin, thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Terry.
Justin, walk us through the status of this nomination in the Senate. Where's it going?
Well, Markwayne Mullin had his confirmation hearing on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee voted to pass him along to the Senate floor. And it looks like, according to Senate Majority Leader John Thune, he could be confirmed as DHS Secretary as soon as Monday. And if that happens, he will inherit a department that is in the midst of the second longest government shutdown in history. Of course, this shutdown is specific to only DHS, but it is certainly grabbing the headlines with those long TSA lines at airports right now.
There were a lot of television-worthy moments in the confirmation hearing. If he is confirmed, how different do you think he'll be as Homeland Security Secretary?
Yeah, there certainly were a lot of viral back and forth sessions between, Mullin and Committee Chairman Rand Paul. One of the interesting things that Mullin did say about, a policy or his policy as DHS Secretary, if confirmed, is that he would revoke Kristi Noem's policy, that she personally review all DHS awards over $100,000. This is a very controversial policy because, according to industry sources and members of Congress, it really gummed up the works at DHS across the board. First and foremost with disaster assistance that's passed through FEMA, but also with cybersecurity contracts and even Trump administration priorities like border wall construction. This policy has been in place since July 2025. Noem said it was aimed at rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse. But as we've said, this has really become a controversial policy because it's a huge department to be having the secretary approve every single $100,000 contract that goes through it. Mullin said he would, quote, absolutely revoke that if he's confirmed.
That's called micromanaging, and I don't know if Secretary put that in or someone else did. I'm not a micromanager. We put people in, we empower them to make decisions. What is required to come up to my level will make decisions. We will have a very clear line of communication with every one of our agency's heads on their authority that you gave to them within their parameters, and we'll discuss. But we're also going to be very responsible for the taxpayer dollars.
I'm sure that will make some folks breathe a little bit easier. Secretary Noem has also caught a lot of criticism for changes she's overseen at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Did Senator Mullin say anything about his plans for FEMA?
He did touch on that a little bit. He was asked about it by Senator Andy Kim. Of course, the Trump administration, President Trump himself early on suggested his administration could, quote, get rid of FEMA. And Kristi Noem took to saying that FEMA should, quote, be eliminated as it exists today. There is a FEMA Review Council that actually put together a draft report that suggests major changes and staffing cuts at FEMA, but the finalization of that report has been delayed since December, so it's unclear kind of how those recommendations move forward. But the upshot is that FEMA has lost thousands of staff over the last year, and further potential cuts are on hold due to an ongoing court case that is challenging those reductions. Mullin was asked about all this, and he said that he doesn't see a need to eliminate FEMA, but he also didn't rule out further staff cuts.
As I said, I think it needs to be restructured, not eliminated. Pretty sure that you guys set the policies and the mission for FEMA, so for any serious changes, it may take actually policy changes.
So beyond those issues of letting $100,000 contracts move along and sorting out what will happen to FEMA, immigration enforcement is a top focus here. Did Senator Mullin say how he'd be approaching that?
Well, Mullin has been a big backer of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement policies in his time in the Senate. And there's no reason to think that he's going to obviously reverse course on those policies on, ramping up deportations, things like that. He did say that he wants to get to a point where DHS is no longer in the headlines every day and on the nightly news every day, suggesting that he's certainly at this point in time not an endorser of Kristi Noem's kind of high-profile immigration enforcement agenda that really kind of doomed ultimately her time as Homeland Security Secretary within the last few months. Of course, there's a lot of questions about who's calling the shots about immigration enforcement. You have Stephen Miller still at the White House. So you have Border Czar Tom Homan. So to what extent Markwayne Mullin will actually have a lot of control over that issue remains to be seen if he's confirmed.
Well, this confirmation is moving along at a rapid pace, maybe one of the fastest in recent memory. So beyond the topics that we've talked about here, what else do you think people will be watching for?
I think a big one, at least for our audience, is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and how Markwayne Mullin oversees that, to what extent he tries to kind of shore things up there. Because CISA has lost about a third of its staff over the past year, going from around 3,400 to 2,200 or so in the last year. They've lost a lot of senior executive folks. They've lost a lot of cyber talent in general who are leading some pretty high-profile cyber programs. He was asked a little bit about this during the hearing by Senator Maggie Hassan. He kind of just said, we've got to recruit the right people for cybersecurity. He also was asked if he would add people back into CISA, and all he said was that he doesn't know what the mission requires at this point, but will be adequately staffed, and we need to find the right people. So nothing much there during the nomination hearing itself, but that will be something that I think a lot of folks in this space will be watching closely. How does Markwayne Mullin handle that really important component in CISA?
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for keeping us up to date. Senator Mullin will certainly have a very steep learning curve once he's on the job.
He certainly will. Thanks for having me, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, a strategic alliance between the Federal Laboratories Consortium and FedTech is looking to speed up how federally funded research becomes real-world technology. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.